No one came to his funeral. Not a single face in the pews. Not a single chair filled. Just me. I stood in the back, full uniform, medals, polished shoes, creases sharp, hands behind my back. 84 years old and still capable of standing at attention longer than most men half my age. Walter Red Carlson. Charlie Company. Vietnam. 68. That's who they were putting in the ground today. No family. No service record read aloud. No folded flag handed over to a widow. Just a pine box and a time slot on the schedule. I didn't get an official invite. I got a call. A nurse at the care facility. Mr. Carlson passed yesterday. You were listed as emergency contact. I didn't ask why he listed me. I already knew. I was the only one left. Red and I weren't brothers by blood, but we shared a trench, shared smokes under fire, and once, a rain poncho when the roof collapsed over our bunks. That counted for something. I hadn't seen him in years. Last I heard, he'd stopped going to VFW meetings, got tired of telling stories no one wanted to hear. Said people only clap for the stories with medals and endings. His didn't have either. They said he'd outlived everyone. No kids, never married. Siblings gone. His squad? Mostly dead. Few scattered. One with dementia. One missing. One. Me. Still. Sharp enough to remember what mattered. And what mattered was this. A soldier doesn't go in the ground alone. That morning, I got dressed in silence. Took my time. Polished every brass pin. Fastened each button like it still meant something. It did. When I arrived, the funeral director looked at me sideways. You here for Carlson? Yes. You family? No. I'm the one who served with him. He nodded like he didn't know what else to say. There's no one else coming, he mumbled. I know. He gestured toward the front. You can sit wherever you want. I didn't sit. I stood at the end of the aisle facing the flag-draped coffin. No photos on display. No slideshow. No priest. Just the box. I walked down the aisle. Stopped beside the casket. Rested one hand on it. You didn't go out alone, Red. I said it low. For him. Not anyone else. No one clapped. No speeches. Just quiet. I stepped back. Saluted. Held it. 1 full hour. My shoulder ached. My back throbbed. My knees hated me. Didn't matter. I didn't drop my arm. Because a man like Red deserved at least 60 minutes of remembrance. The groundskeeper finally appeared. He waited off to the side, hat in hand, respectful enough not to interrupt. I gave one nod and lowered my arm. Then I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a photo from Vietnam. 7 men, arms over shoulders, dirt on our faces. Red, second from the left. I slid it under the flag. You earned better, I whispered. This'll have to do. And I turned, walked out, and left the silence behind me. Back at home, I didn't take off the uniform. Didn't feel right. I sat at the kitchen table, same seat I'd used every morning since my wife passed. Folded my hands. Laid Red's photo. In front of me. The same one I'd slid under his flag. This was a copy I kept. I stared at it for a long time. There he was. Lean, sharp-jawed, cigarette in his teeth. Always looked like he was seconds from calling somebody out. That was Red, tougher than most. Didn't flinch under pressure. But he laughed easy too. Real laugh. Deep, from the gut. People think war changes a man. Truth is, it just shows you who he really is. Red didn't change. Not during. Not after. He came home quieter than before. Not broken. Just tired. Like the war took a piece of him and never gave it back. I tried staying in touch. Sent letters. Christmas cards. Checked in. He always answered short but steady. I'm good. Still breathing. Hope you are too. Then, 1 year, nothing came back. Didn't mean I forgot. Didn't mean he didn't matter. I opened my drawer and pulled out the old list. 37 names. All men we'd served with. Every one of them marked KIA, MIA, or passed since the war. I kept the list updated. It wasn't official, but it was real. It was ours. I found Red's name. It was already there. I had written it down the night the nurse called, but now I added something beside it. Not alone. Because that's what matters in the end. It's not the medals, not the commendations or combat stories. It's whether someone still remembers you when the noise fades, when the uniforms are packed away, when the government forgets to file your name with a trumpet. Red didn't have a grand exit, but he had me, and as long as I was standing, he wasn't going into that dirt like a ghost. Later that evening, I called Vance. He was one of the last few, alive from our unit. Lives out in Arizona, doesn't move much. Voice is gravel now, thick with age. I told him what happened, told him I stood at Red's funeral. He had no one, Vance, I said. Long silence. Then, he had you. I didn't say anything back, didn't need to. Before we hung up, he said, "When it's my time, I hope you're still upright." "I'll be there," I told him. And I meant it. I put the uniform back on its hanger that night, pressed the creases out carefully. Then I sat down with my pen and started writing a new list. Not just names, not just deaths, but dates, places, the men I'd stood for, because someone needs to carry the memory, and if no one else will, I will. The week after Red's funeral, I went back to the cemetery. No service this time, no uniform. Just me, my knees, and a folded chair. I brought a proper marker. The temporary tag they stuck in the ground looked like it belonged to a lost dog, not a soldier. I paid out of pocket. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't ask permission. Simple stone. Name, rank, dates, but I added something else at the bottom. He didn't go alone. When the groundskeeper saw me digging, he walked over. "You family?" "No," I said. "I'm the man who remembered him." He stood there a moment, then nodded. "World needs more of that." I didn't answer. I just set the stone, ran my hand across it once. Dust scraped my skin, felt right. I sat for an hour, didn't say anything, just sat. And when I got up to leave, I left something behind. A photo, laminated, tucked into the edge of the stone. Same one from Vietnam. Let someone else see the face. Let someone else know he lived before he died. 2 days later, a young woman called me, said she was a volunteer at the cemetery. She found the photo, asked if I was the one who left it. I said yes. She asked who he was to me. I told her he was my brother, not by blood, by something stronger. Silence on her end. Then she said, "I've worked here 2 years. I've never seen someone do what you did." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She asked if she could share the photo. Said there were people who'd want to hear the story. I said no. Red didn't need to go viral. He needed to be remembered, not as a symbol, not as some social media caption, as a man, a soldier, my brother. Later that night, I found myself looking through the old footlocker in my closet. Haven't touched it in years. Inside, photos, pins, a letter from my wife when I was in country, and a patch, our unit's emblem, still intact, thread fraying at the edges. I took it out, looked at it, and for the first time in a long while, I said his name out loud, Walter Carlson. Like it mattered, because it did. He didn't have a crowd at his funeral. He didn't get a 21-gun salute, but he had someone who wore the same mud, someone who remembered the sound of his voice, someone who stood when everyone else forgot, and that's the kind of goodbye every soldier deserves. I kept thinking about something Red once said. It was 1969, the night before we shipped out. We were sitting on sandbags behind the barracks, splitting a warm beer someone smuggled in. Most of the guys were writing letters home. Red was staring at the sky. "If I go down out there," he said, "don't let me disappear." I didn't say anything then. I just nodded. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. None of us thought we'd die, even though we knew we could. We all talked like we were invincible, even with rifles across our laps and names on dog tags. But Red knew better. He always saw it clearer than the rest of us. He didn't want to be famous. He didn't want medals or flags flown for him. He just didn't want to vanish. That stayed with me. It's why I answered that call. Why I stood by that casket alone. Why I marked his grave with my own hands. Because disappearing doesn't happen in a moment. It happens when no one remembers. When no one speaks your name. When no one shows up. And I wasn't going to let that happen to him. A week later, I went to the local VFW. Walked in. Same as always. Slow. Quiet. Few nods from the regulars. One of the new guys, maybe mid-40s, saw the patch on my jacket and asked, "You serve with Carlson?" "Yeah." He raised his glass. He was my uncle. I stopped. Didn't know he had family, I said. Didn't, really, he shrugged. Estranged. Mom and him fell out. Last I heard, he was in a home. He was, I said. I heard what you did, the guy said. Thank you. None of us would have even known. I didn't know what to say to that. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small square box. Opened it. Inside was a bronze star. He never claimed it, the man said. Said he didn't do anything special. He didn't, I said. He just did what others wouldn't. The man handed me the box. You keep it, he said. You were there at the end. I looked down at the metal, clean and sharp in its casing. For a second I saw Red again, grinning, cussing at something, calling me old man even though we were the same age. I closed the box, slipped it into my coat. I'll make sure people know, I said. About the metal? He asked. No, I said, about him. Because a metal can rust, but a story, when told right, stays alive. The next morning I visited the high school in town. Didn't tell anyone I was coming. Just walked through the front doors wearing the same coat, same boots, same face that hadn't smiled much since Red went into the ground. I asked the receptionist if I could speak to the history teacher. She looked at me like I was someone important, probably because of the uniform. I wasn't, but I was still standing. 15 minutes later, I sat in front of a class of juniors. Half of them barely looked up from their phones. A few nodded when the teacher introduced me. Vietnam vet, she said. Wants to talk about someone who didn't make the news. I stood there, cleared my throat once, and told them about Walter Carlson. I didn't talk about medals. I didn't give dates. I just told the truth. How he was quiet. How he stayed behind in Nam to cover our withdrawal. How he came back with nothing and lived with less. How he died with no one left to bury him. And how I wasn't going to let him be a name that disappeared into dirt. Somewhere in the middle of that story, one of the boys put down his phone. Another leaned forward. By the end, most of the room was silent. He wasn't a headline, I told them. But he was a brother. And when it counted, he stood. Not for glory, not for recognition. Just because it was the right damn thing to do. The teacher asked if the students had questions. Only one girl raised her hand. Why did you show up? I looked at her steady. Because no one else did. And because I promised him I wouldn't let him vanish. That was all I said. I left right after. Didn't wait for thanks. Didn't want any. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten. No return address. It read, "Thank you for showing us that heroes don't always wear capes or get statues. Some just show up when nobody's watching." Inside was a small slip of paper. On it, 23 names of the students from that class. Every one of them signed it. At the top, in big block letters, Walter Red Carlson, remembered. I pinned it on the wall beside his photo. Didn't cry. Didn't need to. Just nodded once. Because he wasn't disappearing anymore. Not while I was still breathing. Not while even one kid in that classroom remembered the man who stood when everyone else ran. A month after that classroom visit, I started hearing things. Not voices, not ghosts. Just murmurs. At the VA clinic, a nurse stopped me in the hallway. "You're the guy who stood at Carlson's funeral, right?" I nodded. She smiled. "Thought so. Someone came in last week asking for his file. Said they wanted to write about him. Wasn't family. Just curious." That word stuck with me. Curious. Red didn't live a life people asked questions about. He wasn't loud. Didn't campaign. Didn't ask for anyone's attention. But now, someone cared. I went home and pulled the old footlocker down again. Spent the evening going through it. Found every photo with Red in it. Letters, notes, even. One of those cheap souvenir dog tags we all got made in Saigon. It said, "Carlson, no regrets." I stared at it for a long time. He never said those words out loud. Never had to. The next day I walked into the local newspaper office, didn't make an appointment, just asked to speak to a reporter. Young man, maybe 30. Clean cut. Smelled like coffee and ink. I told him everything. He listened the whole way. Through. No interruptions. Took notes the old-fashioned way. Pen and paper. When I finished, he asked one question. "Why now?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Because I'm running out of time, and I'm not going to leave this world knowing one of the best men I ever knew disappeared just because no one bothered to remember him." He nodded. I handed over a folder. Photos, letters, everything I had. You don't have to make it pretty, I told him. Just make it real. He promised he would. 2 weeks later, the piece ran on the front page of the Sunday edition. The soldier who died alone, but was never forgotten. There was a photo of Red, not in uniform. Just him, smiling, half drunk, at a 4th of July barbecue in '77. The kind of smile you don't fake, the kind of picture that reminds you a person was real. I went to the cemetery that day, read the article aloud beside the stone. Didn't care who saw me. You made the front page, Red, I said. Took long enough. I left a copy folded neatly against the headstone, weighed down by a rock. It was gone the next day. Someone else had taken it. Good. Let them learn his name. Let them pass it on. A man doesn't need a monument to be remembered. Sometimes, he just needs one stubborn old friend who refuses to let him fade. It was late spring when the first letter arrived. No return address. Just a plain envelope with neat handwriting. Inside, a single page. My father served with Carlson. I never met him, but my dad always said Red was the one who pulled him out when things got bad. He never forgot him. And now, thanks to you, neither will I. Below that, a name and a note that said the sender had visited Red's grave. Left a coin. Marine tradition. I went to the cemetery the next morning. There it was, a quarter, balanced, perfectly on top of the stone. Meant the visitor had served with him. Understood the weight of that memory. I didn't touch it. Didn't need to, because that coin meant more than flowers or flags. It meant someone else was standing now. 2 weeks later, another envelope came. Then another. And another. Some were from old vets. Some from their kids. One came from a schoolteacher in Oregon who'd read the article to her class. Said her students. Each wrote a sentence about someone worth remembering. One of them simply wrote, Red stood. I want to be like Red. That letter stayed on my kitchen table for days. I must have read it 100 times, because all it takes is one sentence. One name spoken out loud to keep someone alive. I started a small binder, labeled it Carlson, Not Forgotten. Filled it with every letter, every name, every clipped article, every photo people mailed me. Some even sent in old snapshots from base camps, holidays, long-forgotten barracks. Faces faded with time, but there was Red, always right in the middle. That same half grin, like he was listening to a joke and already planning his comeback. The binder got thicker and heavier, but I didn't mind. Every page was proof. Proof that he didn't disappear. Proof that someone who lived quiet could still echo loud decades after he was gone. One night, I went to the VFW again. Stood up during open mic, a tradition for the old-timers. Told them what was happening. Told them about the letters, the kids, the coins on the stone. When I finished, nobody said anything for a full minute. Then one of the newer vets, hadn't even been born when Red passed, raised his glass. To Carlson, he said, may we all have a friend who remembers us like that. They all echoed it, loud, proud. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I hadn't just remembered Red. I'd revived him. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a story, a reason. Name passed from hand to hand like something sacred. The binder outgrew itself, had to start a second one. Same label, new volume. Carlson, Not Forgotten, Volume 2. Didn't think I'd live long enough to need it. One letter stood out. Came from a young recruit at boot camp in South Carolina. Said the drill sergeant had read the article during a leadership session. We're told real heroes aren't the loud ones. Real heroes show up. One of the guys cried when he heard about Red's funeral. Said he'd been afraid of dying alone. Not anymore. I read that line 3 times. Then I put the letter in the front of the second binder. Page 1. Because that's what this had become. Not just a tribute, but a torch. One man. No funeral crowd, no ceremony, but a legacy now carried by strangers, in places he'd never walked. And that's how memory works. It doesn't need to be famous, it just needs to be passed on. The VA invited me to speak the next Memorial Day. First time they'd asked in years. Said they wanted someone with a story. Worth hearing. I said, I don't have a story. Then I paused. But Red does. I stood at the podium with both binders beside me. Didn't need a speech. Didn't write one. I just told them about a man who didn't ask to be remembered, but damn well deserved to be. I told them how he was buried alone. How I stood for him. How that one act turned into a ripple. Letters, coins, kids in classrooms, Marines at attention in a cemetery they'd never been to. I finished with a sentence I hadn't planned. None of us gets to choose how we're remembered, but we all get to choose who we remember. People stood, applauded. Not for me, for him. The next day I visited Red's grave. There were 6 coins now, 2 notes, and a photo I hadn't seen before, black and white, dated 1971. Red sitting on a cot, holding a can of beans, smirking at the camera. I smiled. Someone else had remembered the man behind the uniform. That meant more than any flag ever could. Sat beside the grave again. Didn't say much. Just looked at the stone. Thought about how quiet the funeral was, and how loud the legacy had become. Red hadn't vanished, not even close. He had become a reminder that even when no one shows up, you still can. And when you do, you light a fire that others can carry. A letter came from a boy in high school, 15, maybe 16. It was written on lined notebook paper, folded 4 times, sealed in an envelope with duct tape like he was afraid it might fall apart before it reached me. It read, I never met Red, but I read about him in class. We were asked to write a report on someone forgotten. I picked him. My teacher cried. I didn't know a person could die and still matter this much. Thank you for standing for him. I hope someone stands for me when I'm gone. I sat with that letter for a long time. It didn't need edits, didn't need grammar checks. It had heart, and heart remembers louder than history books ever will. I sent a reply. Short and handwritten. Red would have stood for you too, because that's who he was. So I will. Didn't sign it with my name. Just wrote, a man who remembers. I got a call from a local vet group not long after. Said they'd read the article, seen the letters, heard about the classroom visit. Would you let us start a memorial event in Carlson's name? They asked. I was quiet for a second, then said, only if you do it right. What does right mean? No speeches, I told them. No banners, just people showing up. So they did. The first Carlson stand happened on the anniversary of his death. 20 people came. No program, no chairs, just folks in quiet formation by his grave. Some saluted. Some stood with hands clasped. Some didn't do anything but bow their heads. That was enough, because when people choose to remember, not out of duty but will, that's the purest honor there is. I made a vow that day, every year, same time. I'd be there, standing. Whether one person came or 100, I'd be there. Because Red deserved consistency, even if the world had forgotten to give it to him while he was alive. The binders now sit on my bookshelf. Volume 3 has started. Letters still arrive. A girl from Texas wrote that her father, a Gulf War vet, now keeps a photo of Red in his wallet. He said it reminds him why he puts on the uniform every morning, she wrote. Because someone before him bled, stood, and never asked for applause. That's how you know a man made a mark, when his name gives strength to people he never knew, when his memory stands taller than his grave. Some people think legacies are built on action, but I've learned they're built on remembrance, and remembrance isn't loud, it's quiet, patient, unshakable, like a man standing alone in full uniform, beside a coffin, because no one else showed up. The last time I visited the cemetery, I brought something different. Not a letter, not a coin, a small wooden plaque, hand-carved, nothing fancy. On it, I'd burned the words, Walter Red Carlson, remembered by those who choose to stand. I placed it just behind the headstone, where it wouldn't get knocked down or blown away. Sat down beside it, my knees stiff, heart steady. It had been nearly 2 years since that silent funeral. And in those 2 years, his name had traveled more than he ever did alive. Letters still arrived, stacked neatly in a shoebox now. Kids, veterans, teachers, even one chaplain who read Red's story aloud during a funeral for another forgotten soldier, said it gave people something to believe in, something to carry. Red had become more than just a man. He'd become a reason to show up, a reason to remember, a reason to stand. As I sat there, an older couple passed by. They weren't visiting Red's grave. They were walking past it on their way to someone else. The woman stopped, tilted her head, read the plaque. Who's Red Carlson? she asked. Her husband paused. I think I read about him. The one who didn't have anyone come to his funeral? I stood up beside them. He does now, I said. They both looked at me. Are you family? No, I said. I was a friend, a brother in arms. They nodded, and the man saluted the stone, not forced, just natural. Then he wasn't alone after all, he said. No, I replied. He never was. When they walked away, I stood for a while longer. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my own set of tags, laid them gently beside his headstone, not to leave them, just to let them rest beside his for a minute, like we were back in the barracks. One more night, 2 brothers waiting for morning, and then I said it, clear and low, for no one but him. You didn't disappear, Red. Not on my watch, not ever. I picked up the tags, tucked them back under my shirt, and turned to leave. As I walked away, I looked over my shoulder one last time. A young man, maybe 20, in uniform, was walking up from the road. He was holding a small American flag. When he reached Red's grave, he knelt, planted the flag in the soil, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Didn't need to, because I knew what it was. You're not forgotten. If Red's story stood tall in your heart, drop 1 word below to carry it forward. Say, remembered. And if you believe no soldier should go alone, even if it's been decades, subscribe, because someone has to keep the stories alive. And if you're reading this, maybe that someone is you.